Hi, today I'm going to show you how to configure Presonus Studio One software with the Expert Sleepers voice controller. And I'm going to show you how to calibrate your modular synth using the voice controller plugin. So to give you a quick overview, I'm using Presonus Studio One version 2.0.7, which is the latest software as of November 2012. I'm running it on a Windows 7 64-bit system, and I've got an RME audio interface with 3 ADAT ports. I've got the first ADAT port connected to the Expert Sleepers ES3 modular interface. So that's kind of the basic backdrop for the demonstration today. So the demonstration is going to focus on calibration, which is kind of a tricky technique, and I've been successful with some of my synths, and other synths haven't been as successful. But I'll show you how I've set this up on Studio One. So the first thing I'm going to do is look at the audio interface, and I want to look at my inputs and outputs. My inputs, pretty simple. I've got a stereo SPDIF input that I'll be using, and in terms of my outputs, I currently, there was my inputs, so there's a stereo SPDIF inputs. My outputs, all I have right now is one stereo output. That's what I use for monitoring. For calibration purposes, I'm going to create an additional stereo output. When I add that, it's called sub 1, and it automatically is mapped to my to whatever of the available output ports there are. It just happens to be the first 2 channels of my first ADAT port, which is great because that's the ADAT port which is connected to my ES3 modular interface. And so I'm using channel 1 and channel 2 as a stereo channel. The fact that it's a stereo channel, the reason why it's 2 channels and not a mono channel, will become more apparent here shortly. Click OK. And you can see that output channel, the first 2 channels of my ADAT port appear in the mixer console. If you can't see the mixer console, click on the mix console button in the lower right hand corner. You can also make sure that you're displaying both the inputs and the outputs. Sometimes I don't have all these things enabled, but for demonstration purposes I wanted you to be able to see the actual outputs that I was creating. Okay, so we have this stereo output. It's mapped to channel 1 and 2 on my ADAT interface connected to the ES3 module. Next, we're going to create a stereo track, and we're going to add to that stereo track the voice controller effect. So make sure it's the effect and not the instrument version. I'm going to add the effect and just drag and drop it right onto that stereo audio track. The voice controller, if you click on the prefs button on the panel, you'll see that the voice controller plugin is set up to use 3 stereo tracks as outputs. Now, what's a little bit confusing is that because of the way Studio One works, Studio One allows you to create mono or stereo tracks. It doesn't let you create something like a 5.1 multi-track output for a single audio track. And so because of that, it's kind of a limitation with this particular plugin used as an effect. Because of that, you can only use the first 2 outputs on the voice controller effect plugin. That's not such a big deal for me, because the first two outputs are by default, the first two outputs are connected to the pitch, control voltage, and the gate. And so I've got the port 1 on the ES3 connected to my control voltage input on my synth, and I've got port 2 on the ES3 interface connected to the gate input on my synth. And so with the pitch, control voltage, and the gate, that's really all I need in order to calibrate my particular instrument. I can see where this may be a limitation with calibrating other types of instruments potentially, although I haven't run into any limitations. Hopefully in the future the Presonus Studio One will be able to support something like a side chain input into the voice controller instrument, and I think it would make this whole calibration process a little bit more straightforward. So anyways, the voice controller now is set up to send its outputs to it's currently set to send its outputs to the main out. And what we need to do is make sure that for this track 1, we need to make sure that the output, instead of going to the main outs, is actually going to sub 1. So by making that change, what I've essentially just done is I've configured the two outputs from the Silent Way voice controller plugin. Those two outputs now are going to be mapped to the two channels, the first two channels on my ADAT output, which are connected to my ES3 controller. So anything on channel 1 from the plugin will get emitted from port 1 on the ES3 module. Okay. So we're almost there. Now the last thing we really need to do is we need to capture that incoming audio that's being generated by our synth as it's being calibrated, and we need to feed that back into this plugin. And we just simply do that by turning on the track monitoring on track 1. So now any of that incoming audio will go directly into that effect. So what's going to happen here when I click on Calibrate is the plugin is going to send the signals via the first two channels, and those signals are going to be the pitch, control voltage, and the gate. Those signals will be transmitted from the output of the channel 1 and 2 on the ADAT, translated by the ES3 module, converted into control voltages, and sent out via port 1 and port 2 on the ES3 interface. So I'm going to go ahead and click on the Calibrate. But before I do that, I'm going to turn off my mic because I'm actually monitoring my mic signal, and that could potentially impact the calibration. Okay, there we go. So that's pretty much what you want to see when you've calibrated your synth. It's going to essentially play. The calibration starts off at a very low pitch and then goes to a higher pitch, and is measuring the audio feedback signal. And you want to have, if possible, and I'm using in my system, I'm using a Schweiman VCO6 oscillator, which tracks extremely well across a very large range, and so that's why you're seeing a very nice linear slope to this calibration line. Once you've calibrated, then you just go ahead and save that calibration, and you can save it as a profile. on your system. So it might take you a few times. If it doesn't work quite right the first time, or if there seems to be like strange little artifacts in that calibration slope, then try it again. Also, try to use a very simple oscillation wave pattern from your oscillator. So you use like a sine wave, versus something that's maybe a little bit more complex. If your signal is going through a filter, then you just want to make sure that you're not doing any kind of crazy modulation or filtering of your signal. You want a really clean output, as clean as possible from your system. If you've got multiple oscillators, I recommend just using one oscillator and turning the other oscillators off on your modular synth. So I hope these tips helped, and thanks for watching the video.